We will next turn to some of the great heroes of the last presidential election, and I am excited to introduce a great friend of mine, Adrian Fontes, who has been on the front lines of protecting our community as a U.S. Marine, doing prosecution, and then as Maricopa County Recorder, and now our Secretary of State. So in Maricopa County, the Recorder and the Board of Supervisors run the elections, and they were very much on the forefront of very difficult disputes. The main election office is in the city of Phoenix, and so Adrian and I got to work very closely together on how to do safety around the elections. I never, as mayor of a U.S. city, thought we would have to talk about preparing for people who were trying to overthrow an election, but we did, and it was wonderful to have a steady voice in the recorder's office, really trying to make sure we were transparent and led with data and talked to people about the great protections behind this, the 2020 presidential election, and to be able to think strategically about how we keep people safe during that type of crisis. So I appreciated Adrian Fontes' partnership in that area. Since that time, he went on to be elected statewide and administer our elections. If you saw the cover of Time magazine, he was on it, given how important he is in protecting democracy in this country, and he has done a great job modernizing our elections, explaining to people what we do and how we do it, and just being a great voice of reason in a difficult time. So please welcome one of our great leaders of democracy, Adrian Fontes.
Thank you. Welcome to Phoenix, and a special thank you very much to those of you who joined us last evening. We had a great time over at my place, and those of you who missed it, you're going to have to wait till you guys come back next time. I'm Adrian Fontes. I'm Arizona's 21st Secretary of State, and we're going to have a great discussion here for a moment, but I did want to take just a couple of minutes and really sort of set the much bigger picture at a philosophical level. Throughout human history, leadership has always been critical and important, and just up until almost 250 years ago, the leader was really determined mostly either by heredity or violence, and in some cases both. And the great experiment that was launched on the North American continent was really, and I should say does really continue to remain an experiment. We are working hard to try to figure out how those tendencies that are established well are tendencies towards heredity and giving folks family credit just because of the luck of birth, or violence towards a strong leader, not necessarily reasoned or rational, but just looking towards strength in leadership, how those things are so embedded in our narratives, they're so embedded in our culture, they're so embedded in humanity that we're trying to wrestle our way away from them as our founders tried to do. It was the age of reason. It was a time when data and science were being born. It was a moment when we were trying to rip ourselves away from the mythologies of human history that propelled us into a sort of organization. And if we look to the way people lived, if we look to the quality of a daily life, for the vast majority of humanity, at the time of the inception of this republic, we're looking at a very, very different landscape. We're looking at a time and a place where the very tiny few had privilege, but none of them lived as well as the vast majority of us do now. And in our own nation now, we hear calls for the re-examination of democracy. Well, maybe it's not so great after all, right? Maybe it's time to get to the one strong leader so we all just don't have to worry about it so much anymore, because all of this thinking and looking at stuff and reading is such a pain in the tail. Those voices aren't going anywhere for a while. And so what we need to do is make sure that we not only make the case, but we continue to work towards revamping this experiment, re-energizing our own folks out there in the world and letting them understand why this is so important. And right here in Arizona, we made the case in 2022 that defeated election deniers in a U.S. Senate race, in a governor's race, in a secretary's race, in an attorney general's race, and in what was once the bastion of Joe Arpaio's SB 1070 rounding up of quote-unquote illegals. We saw Democrats sweep the top offices with the following arguments. I made many of them myself. But let me frame this. We didn't make it just to our own voters. We didn't just make the argument to our own people. We reached across the aisle and we spoke directly and firmly with our political opponents, but we didn't frame it as political opponent. We framed it as co-operators within this society. Now, on the panel in a moment, joining me will be a good friend of mine, Bill Gates, a supervisor from Maricopa County, and one of the folks who reported on us will be moderating. But the message that we sent was a clear message. And in most simple terms, it was this. Yes, as a Democrat, you can call me a lefty, you can call me a liberal, that's fine. And there are these, well, I'll use my left side. There are these warm and fuzzies that I want. I do want people to feel good. I do want people to live well. I do want the majority of society to have dignity and respect. And that means I need social programs, but I can't do this without opportunity, without prosperity, without economic foundations in our communities that are going to allow for a reasonably large enough tax base to take care of these other things. We can do all of it. I believe that we can do all of it. It's like the president says, we are the United States of America, and there isn't anything that we cannot do if we put our minds to it. That's a rough paraphrase, but you get the point. And I challenged the business classes who tend to the other political side. I challenged many of these folks who tend to the other side to consider where in an authoritarian regime, where in the few totalitarian spaces left on this planet, can you find opportunity? Can you have someone from a lower caste or economic system rise to the top of leadership? Where in authoritarian systems do you find the sorts of debate that bring about innovation, the sorts of attitude that brings about the capacity to have opportunity in the first place? It only happens in liberal democracies. And those folks listened, because I also told them this. One of the key pillars and institutions of our democracy are an independent judiciary. And every time you sign a lease, every time you invent a new product, every time a purchase order goes out, every time you write a check, you expect the legal system that backs that up to be there. You take it for granted that when you make a promise, there is a contract that will be upheld. And I told my friends in the chambers of commerce and in the various other spaces that concentrate really on money and profits, you can't guarantee any of that in an authoritarian regime. You can only guarantee your economic prosperity in a democracy. And that's why we must protect democracy. Because at the end of the day, we all know the business of America is business. And that's not a bad thing. And when we run away from the reality of that notion, that not so complex idea that opportunity only exists where freedom exists, that the capacity to rise only exists when there is room to rise, that's where we become powerful. That's where we can welcome more folks into the fold. And that's why we were successful in Arizona. We are, as the mayor said, at the forefront of so many things political. And I think one of those things is making sure that we reach out across all of the political aisles and we hit folks where it matters, in what interests them. And we can continue to do that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come here today and to do this. I think, am I bringing the panel up? I am. Okay. Let's bring the panel up. Can I get... Yes, I just told Debbie I'm kind of a moron. I don't want to forget anybody. First and foremost, I'd like to bring up one of our unsung heroes, and this is someone who operates at the most local level, the place where it actually happens, the place where I came from. It is county government. In Arizona, the counties run our elections, and in Colorado, Jefferson County. I went to the University of Denver for law school, so it's Jeffco. Their clerk and recorder, Amanda Gonzalez, ladies and gentlemen, come on up. I did go to DU. I'm a pioneer. They have the goofiest logo, and then they switched it when I was there. Also with us coming onto the stage from the Washington Post, formerly of the Arizona Republic. She keeps us accountable and has delivered a gun punch to me once or twice, but I still like her because she's very smart. Yvonne Wingett Sanchez over on the end. She'll be moderating. And then I will last introduce a very dear friend, and I tell you what, folks, if ever there was a couple of folks who really, really did work together across the aisles, behind the scenes, and made things happen before bipartisanship was even talked about in a popular way, because it was pretty rough back in those days. My dear, dear friend and former chairman, are you currently chair? No. You guys switch up, I can never tell. From the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, Arizona's Bill Gates.
Can you all hear me? Oh, it works. Thank you all for coming and participating in such an important conversation about physical threats and cyber threats and what all of this means ahead of 2024. It feels like we've all become so accustomed to having this conversation, right? It's sort of baked into the equation of what it means to administer elections. And we're going to focus most of the conversation on those physical and cyber threats. But there are other sort of worst case scenarios that is the space that we all sort of tend to live in that I think are also important that we highlight today. So many of the concerns from the past 4 years remain the same. This potential for cyber attacks, the targeting of voting systems or websites that maybe report unofficial, inaccurate results, attacks, either foreign or domestic. Conspiracies continue to be amplified by those who are seeking to undermine confidence in the outcome for one reason or another. Former President Donald Trump is already laying the groundwork to say that the 2024 election is on its way to being rigged. We know that election workers like yourselves are bracing for another pretty treacherous year, and we also know that you have no room for error. Can you walk us through how the administration of the 2024 election will look different this year from a voter perspective compared to 2020?
I'll go really quickly. We just don't know, Yvonne, and I think one of the reasons why we don't know how it will look is because of, I'll just start with the big one, right? Generative artificial intelligence. We know there will be misinformation, we know there will be disinformation, we know there will be malinformation. This is the same playbook, it's the same sort of stuff. We've heard it before, we've seen it before in election administration. We understand that there may be different manifestations of a variety of different kinds of physical threats to our voters. In Arizona, in Maricopa County, we saw folks with long rifles standing by ballot drop boxes. We have had our own election warehouse in 2020 when I was administering that election, seized on by armed crowds. These things are not new for us anywhere here. What might be different, however, is with the outset of AI and its capacity to much more broadly, much more deeply, and much more quickly spread these messages. In a prior engagement, I heard somebody describe the poison of sort of the misinformation and such as the same poison in a different vial. Well, I think that's a little inaccurate. I think this is the same poison, but it's not in a vial. It's in a swimming pool. And it's that much of a difference. And I think from the voter's perspective, there's going to be a lot more and spread much more quickly. So it's going to be that much harder to respond. Bill?
First of all, thanks for having me. Great to be here, and welcome to Maricopa County. You were in District 3, by the way, my district, so very proud to have you here at the Canby. I think, you know, if we're comparing this to 2020, we had no idea what we were going into as 2020 came. Adrian talks about the folks armed outside of our tabulation center. We didn't know that was coming. We had no idea. Fortunately, we had an incredible team, the board working with Adrian, working with our sheriff, Paul Penzone, to protect our workers. Then fast forward to 2022, we had even more threats, physical threats. Folks showing up, as Adrian referred to, armed at our drop boxes. People coming and taking pictures of our election workers at the end of 14 and 16-hour days, taking pictures of them, taking pictures of their license plates. So we have made so many changes to protect our workers and to protect the vote centers. But it's very important to understand that for the voter, it's probably not going to look a little different other than the obvious thing from 2020. We had our COVID protocols in place, so we're not going to have those in place. But it's important that while our voters feel protected and safe when they come to vote centers, that they not approach a militarized compound. That is very important. We do not want anyone to feel discouraged from voting because of the presence of law enforcement or anyone else. So we've been very sensitive to that. So it's going to look very similar to the voter, but on the back end, it has been well publicized that we had some challenges in the 2022 election here on Election Day. We had about a third of the vote centers where we had issues with the printers that didn't allow folks to feed their ballots into the tabulators. No one was disenfranchised. They still had the opportunity to have those votes counted later at central count. But we at the Board of Supervisors have invested $15 million since just 2022 to ensure we don't have issues with those printers, and in addition to expanding our operations to allow the vote count to go as quickly as possible while still maintaining accuracy. So I think the short answer is, doesn't look a lot different, but there are significant changes on the back end, and then also we at the board, and I would argue, I think elections officials across the country have redoubled their commitment to transparency, because we do know so many people are looking. Unfortunately, there are so many election conspiracies out there that we all have to raise our voices to respond to. And frankly, to the extent that people do have questions about our election system, it is incumbent upon those of us who are operating this system to educate our voters to address all of the reasonable questions that are raised in good faith.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I'll talk about some of the things I'm optimistic about, right? I don't know about you all, but I think that my 2024 bingo card is a lot more accurate than my 2020 bingo card, right? We know that some of these things are coming. And we're better prepared. So in Colorado, we've passed legislation that better protects election administrators. And I will say that I am the third largest county in Colorado. I've got about 450,000 voters. And for our smaller elections, we bring on about 300 temporary workers. I'll be hiring 900 temporary workers this November. And usually, we have a hard time finding all of our poll workers. We call them election judges in Colorado. And people understand now that they have to stand up for their democracy. They understand that we can't just sit back and expect that it will be okay. Right? I think that January 6th was a wake-up call for so many of us, and that includes election workers. And so when I'm out, at the county fair or whatever event, we're talking about the need for people to come help run our elections, right? Because it's not just me running them. It's your neighbors and your friends and the people that you go to church with. And it's one of the first questions I get is, well, is it safe, right? They saw the news. They know that we have had folks who have been armed. We explain the new protections, we explain that it is safe, and they sign up, right? They want to protect our democracy. We filled all of those spots for our June primary faster than we had ever filled the spots for any other election. And so I think one of the things that will be different is that we know what we're going into this time, we're ready, and people are gonna stand up for our democracy.
So that's the good news. You have people who are willing to participate. Bad news is one of the trends that we have seen emerge is this exodus of election workers since 2020. This is very important. These are the people who are at the heart of the democratic process. The job's always been demanding, and you've been doing it since before it was sexy to do so, I think some would say. You've got this added layer of the harassment, of the threats to lives. And it's resulted in a pretty profound loss of institutional knowledge and experience. Can you talk a bit about how that loss of institutional knowledge is affecting your operations ahead of 2024, and what are you doing to ensure that these people are adequately prepared on the cyber front and on the potential for physical violence front ahead of 2024?
So we're doing a lot. So I'll keep it tight. We've lost senior election officials, either the elected recorder or appointed director, in 12 out of 15 Arizona counties since 2020. And in some counties we've lost both, and in some counties we've lost more than one of each. So there's been a lot of turnover. As the chief election administrator for this state, we have to address this, and so we bolstered our training, our election officer certification, which happens in odd-numbered years, and really made it much more of an experiential thing where people can actually go back to the training. So we've actually done something as simple as record all of our training and make it available online for all of those election officials so they can go back. Because sitting in a classroom for 5 days in a row, you're not going to catch it all. You can go back. We've bolstered the network of support that we have to include bringing in CISA from the Department of Homeland Security, physical security agents and cybersecurity agents to go survey each of our 15 counties and bring to the county officials, not to my office, but to the county officials, a survey of where they may or may not have shortcomings so that they can address those chiefly. And then what we've done in the Secretary of State's office is back that up with tiger teams who can go out to this county or that county and work on their number one priority is bulletproof glass. Okay, we're going to go help find some money and get a tiger team out there to do the design and implementation. These folks need a separate set of software to help defend their information technology systems. We'll set a tiger team out to do that. So our establishment of tiger teams, including a little different from that, is a program that we're starting in 1 July, which is a fellowship where we're paying college and university students, I think it's $15,000 to stick with the county as a permanent employee of the county and put them in there. We're working with our colleges and universities to get them credit and this stipend and give them those extra hands so that the folks who are there can free up and not just have to do the busy work. So we're really augmenting their on-the-ground work. In some places in rural Arizona, we're even providing housing to really bolster that workforce. So we're doing everything that we can, and that's just a quick survey of backing up the local folks at the county level. These guys don't need backup. They got all the deep pockets in the world. No, I'm just kidding. We're doing everything that we can to work with them to really push that forward. But it's useful, I think, and I'll just make a plug for my team, that we have county officials or former county officials, a lot of them, in our office. So they know what questions to ask. They know what our systems look like. They understand the people and the personalities. And that is an insight that is absolutely invaluable to really be able to reach down into the most local level and support them and be the tie-in to the highest level. Like, for example, our National Guard. Arizona National Guard is monitoring every single one of our election systems 24/7 right now in conjunction with the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center. So we're monitoring, we're helping, we're training, we're doing everything that we can to level up because of that loss of experience.
Yeah, Adrian is right that we have been very fortunate at Maricopa County to have a lot of the same team the last 3 elections. We in Maricopa County, we share the election responsibilities at the Board of Supervisors with our county recorder. Stephen Richer obviously was Adrian before. Some of the biggest losses of people in senior leadership have been to Adrian. So Adrian, hands off. Enough of taking our people. No. We work together, and we are extremely grateful for the support that we get at the state level. But it is true, you know, in Maricopa County, we need thousands of people to run our elections. And one of the things that we've done at the Board of Supervisors level is allowing Maricopa County employees, and we've got over 13,000 employees who work for Maricopa County across our 50 lines of business, and we give them, you know, the day off. We give them the opportunity to volunteer with the elections. So the Maricopa County team writ large has come together in this effort. You know, as you were saying, really people understanding the importance of this, and I've seen that as well, who are running into the fire, you know, and understand some of the challenges and want to make a difference and want to protect this democracy, and I'm so grateful for that support.
And so I was elected in 2022. My background is that I was the executive director of Colorado Common Cause, so running a voting rights nonprofit before this. I wrote some of the laws that I'm now implementing, so let's hope I did it right. We'll see. But, you know, I don't know, and I can say this in part because our senior leadership team still has more than 100 years of election administrative experience on it, even though I am new. But I don't know that the measure of success for an election administrator is that they've had, you know, 20 or 30 years of experience, right? The measure of success is this person deeply committed to our democratic values, right? Is this person somebody that is willing to engage in new technology to keep up with the times, to keep up with the modern threats? Is this person deeply connected to their community and listening to their voters for what they actually need? We all know that our elections have not always met the needs of all of our citizens, right? It has not always been an inclusive and welcoming place. And so I think that our modern democracy really needs a new kind of leadership in some of these election administrative spaces, right? I don't know that 30, 40 years ago, you all would be sitting at a conference talking about our democracy and election administration and hearing from an under 40 queer Latina, right? These spaces were not always open to people like us. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity as we look at the future and what the leadership in an election and democracy space looks like.
When you talk about looking ahead for 2024, I think one of the most underrated consequences for people like you was that heavy mental toll, that the threats and the harassment. I mean, you talked about the scene outside of the county tabulation center in 2020, armed protesters. One of your workers could have gotten pulled out into that crowd, was surrounded by some of those people. You have both been targeted by harassing communications, threats. They've come to your home. You've been subjected to similar online behavior. From that vantage point, what are you guys doing this cycle to help prepare and to equip your workers for those cyber and physical threats that maybe not so long ago no one would have thought, you know, really could have had consequences like what we've seen now?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand the nature of the threat, and we have to be smarter about what is and what isn't a threat because of the volume. And unfortunately, you know, we actually have a full-time FTE. We've got a threat assessment officer in the Secretary of State's office that serves to assess threats as against election officials across the state. And it's a sad state of affairs when you've got to have a full-time employee to analyze all of the threats that are coming in. We have regular threat briefings. I have a 4-person security team, including 2 of the people that I stole from Bill in Maricopa County. Shamelessly, they're amazing. I had originally hired them when I was recorder, so they're really mine. But we're really concentrating on, I think the thing that we're doing right now is concentrating on identifying the boogeyman and showing light to it. It's the enemy that you don't know that's the most scary. It's the uncertain thing. It's the thing you just are unfamiliar with that pops up that is the scariest. And so it's sort of inoculation on the one hand, but it's also awareness for prevention on the other hand. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure we have our hands around what the threats are and where they are. And we're actually, I'll say this publicly, we're actively trying to figure out spaces on the backside to be able to provide better psychological and emotional support if necessary for our employees.
Is that new? Sorry to interrupt.
That's new, Yvonne. It's not really breaking news,
smell a story.
but we're thinking about it. I keep forgetting the Washington Post is on the stage. This is just an intimate gathering of friends, after all. And so, we have to think about the possibility that that's going to become necessary. And we have to think about our people, because at the end of the day, this is just about people. And so just attacking the problem isn't going to be enough as we push forward. We also have to make sure that our folks are well cared for and maintain, their own capacity to execute.
And I would say, our experience is very similar. We've partnered with the Secretary of State's office, partnered with law enforcement now for several years on this effort. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I've tried to do is humanize this whole situation. People who get on, these keyboard warriors who get on and say some of the most vile things that you can imagine. And it's one thing for me, I'm an elected official. I mean, I kind of maybe signed up for this. But I'm talking about the fact, because we're focused on transparency, because we have live stream cameras, people go on, they see things occurring in the election office, they think it is evidence of a crime, and then they find out that person's name, and then they berate that person online, getting their email address, and it is awful. And I refuse to be quiet about this. One of the things about people in elections is they tend to kind of keep their heads down, right? They don't want to be part of the story, because they shouldn't be. It should be about the candidates, and they should just be administering. But what I've seen over the past few years is, in my opinion, taking this, just saying it's part of the job, and it's not part of the job, and it's not good for us. It's not good for our mental health. It's not good for our physical health, and that's why I've spoken out about it. And I've been very pleased to have people come to me and say, hey, I'm happy you spoke out, because it made me realize where I'm at. I've had some incredible conversations with people who have said that sort of opened a window for me to then having a conversation with my family. So we need to do that. But it's more than just that. We have also pushed back on when this speech crosses the line into becoming a crime. And at Maricopa County, at the state of Arizona, we have cooperated with the Attorney General's office, with the Department of Justice, and prosecuted these cases, many of us, because it's not right. It's a crime, and we have to speak out. And I would argue, especially my Republican colleagues and I, have to push back on this. It's not acceptable. This isn't free speech. This isn't the way that we treat people who have committed their lives to public service and running our elections. But, we can't stop now, and we have been very clear about our team that they need to take care of themselves. This has been a hamster wheel we've been on since 2020. So we've really encouraged our team to get away, spend time with their family, take a vacation, because we know the next few months are not going to be easy. But it's so important that everyone be on top of their game for what's coming.
Yeah. There's a lot of other female elected officials in this room, and I'm sure that you all sympathize that, I'm sorry, I actually didn't sign up for those very graphic GIFs on Twitter, right? And there are some men on Twitter today that have some big feelings about my earrings, right? My election director didn't sign up to be doxxed, right? But we put up with it because it's worth it, and our democracy is worth it, and we know that we have to do it. And it's, you know, we've looked in Colorado, we've passed some really strong legislation to protect election administrators. We've made it easier and more convenient for election workers to have their information pulled off our public websites. So, you know, they don't have to have their information on our assessor's website anymore, for example. So those things were really important. We've also looked at, it sounds like you've done similar work, of how can we support the mental health of our election workers. And I also think that community is just a huge part of it, right? When do I feel loneliest or most threatened? Well, it's when it's 3 a.m. and I've been scrolling Twitter for too long, right? Because you get sucked into that as if that is reality, right? Reality is actually this room. Reality is my election judges who work in bipartisan teams and end up going on walks together in the off season and ask each other about their grandkids, even though they're not the same party. Like, I have to keep reminding myself that that is reality, and reminding my staff that that is reality, and that we have their backs and we can support them. Because if you let yourself just get sucked into this, it's a really, really scary place to live.
Most people do not live in the space that you have all become accustomed to living in. And this very complex, very complicated election law, election procedure world. States, obviously, jurisdictions do things differently, right? Drop boxes that might be used in one county are not used in another, let alone, you know, state. There are changes to carrying out early voting, mail-in voting. The equipment that you use to check in on election day, how votes are counted, the red mirage that we might see here in Arizona, we won't see, for example, in another state. The average person just doesn't pay attention to this until it is election day or in the days after election day. That really ripe window where conspiracies really do seem to take hold and false information takes hold. How do you get the public? Because this seems to be where the rubber really meets the road, right? Where we start talking about the artificial intelligence, the willingness to believe. We talk about the supply of misinformation. We talk less about the demand, right? This appetite for misinformation and to believe mistruths or untruths. How do you combat that in a very meaningful way? And you are smiling, so I think you have something to say.
I certainly do. And I challenged one of your colleagues at the New York Times with exactly this when he came to talk to me in my office about 2 weeks ago. And the question was a variant of what you asked, and he said, how do you rebuild trust and confidence in a system with so much of this nonsense going on out there? I think that's a fair-ish paraphrase to where you're going. We cannot do any of this alone. There's no amount of money that's going to be able to get the public service announcements out there and do all this other sort of thing that folks are going to pay a lot of attention to. American democracy, as I mentioned in our opening, includes a variety of different institutions, and one of them is the Fourth Estate. And since we know each other, I'm going to pick on you real quick here as a representative of every bit of all of the media, good, bad, and indifferent in the world. Okay, so it's all on you now. We just ran a statewide election in Arizona. Our presidential preference election. It was a week or two after Super Tuesday. Maricopa County did great. Pima County did great. Coconino did great. Navajo, Mojave, Santa Cruz, Gila, Greenlee, Graham, Yuma, La Paz, all those counties did great. Amazing work. Work that would confirm the truth that our elections run well. Work that would be able to rebuild confidence in our electorate that, yes, Arizona runs great elections. And nobody covered it. None of our friends in the Fourth Estate bothered to help us do the thing that they would criticize us for not doing enough to do. And I say this with all politeness and generosity to my friend. We are in this thing called democracy together. I can't tell the story by myself because my legislature won't give me the money to tell it. Maricopa doesn't have the money to tell it. Jeffco doesn't have the money to tell it. We have to have our friends in the media, and if you're listening, celebrate the successes as much as you would give credence or credibility to the questions that you may know are illegitimate in the first place. The good work that so many of you do, whether it's transportation stuff in your cities, whether you're making sure that the buses are running on time and that the water systems work, and all of the little things that we do, that doesn't go and get celebrated until there's a problem. And in the single most critical area, I would argue, in our democracy, the one thing that would allow a free press to exist, our democracy, we're not getting the lift up that I think we would need. And I'm not going to put it all on the media. We certainly could do a better job getting out there and talking about these things. But humanizing it is a strategy that I actually adopted from Bill, because I used to just swing. Now sometimes I put a hand out. We have a whole bunch of different ways of doing this, but we sure could use a little help.
So I agree with what Adrian said, but I'll respectfully disagree just a little bit, because during the PPE, I was down at Maricopa County, and we actually did a ton of interviews with local media. So I was grateful. They were out there. They were reporting on it. Certainly not the attention it would get if there were problems, but local media has been absolutely amazing. And I tell this story. I say, in Republican school, they teach us not to talk to the media. But actually, we at the Board of Supervisors have taken the opportunity in the past few years to get to know the local media, to tell them the story of Maricopa County elections, and I would argue they've done an incredible job of getting the word out. I don't have 1 million or 2 million followers on X to compete with those who spread conspiracy theories, but by doing 16 press conferences like we did with the recorder's office, with the sheriff, in 2022, we were able to get the story out there. There are some people who don't want to hear the truth, but for those people who have open minds and open hearts, for them, getting this information out there, even if it just allows them, they may be the only one at that table, that dinner table, the family dinner table, who reads this stuff, but if it gives them some ammunition to tell the truth to their family members who have shut down, this is a long battle, I'm sorry to say. This isn't going to be over at the end of 2024. There are people who have completely lost faith, but it's got to start somewhere. And I feel very privileged to be in one place where it has started, where we have pushed back against these narratives. And we'll continue to do it. But the only way that we can do it is by not getting discouraged, to continue to get up, to push for further transparency, to push for, more live stream cameras and get the facts out there. But I am truly privileged to have a partner in Adrian Fontes and another partner in Stephen Richer, and then of course my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors who are really good at telling this story. And that's what we've got to do. This is a story. It's not facts and figures. It's the story of American democracy that will hopefully bring these people back in the fold.
Don't y'all wish that shot of you standing in your election center, Clerk Gonzalez stands here, everything's going well, right? Just wish that was as shareable as all of the other stuff. I will just share, one of the things that we have done is we've been much more active about getting out in the community. I've hired a full-time outreach staff, bilingual, that goes to people, right? And we just know that not everybody feels good about coming to our big, scary government office. So we're at the Kite Festival, we're at the Pozole Festival, we're registering voters, we're recruiting judges, we're talking about elections and what's happening. We've increased the number of tours that we give of our election facility by about 3x. So that guy that sends the open records request every week, we're like, Bill, you should just come on down, hang out with us. And we really are inviting more folks in. I will say, unfortunately, the tour usually ends with, okay, everything looks good around here. but I don't know about Georgia, right? Like whatever the thing is. But I think that that is sort of how we chip away at some of that, is we're inviting people closer in and we're going out to where they are.
Another thing that would be great if you could invite people in would be the artificial intelligence tabletops that you guys are doing. I know that these are closed door, low key. This is an appeal to let the press in to get a sense of how you guys are preparing on that front. But obviously AI is capable of creating an endless number of fraudulent fake images. They can be very difficult to detect, easy to believe. You guys are all training, gearing up to combat this in a way that we have not seen before. Outside of these tabletops that I jokingly express frustration in
You're
that
not
we can't
joking
attend.
about it. You're frustrated.
I am frustrated that we
I
can't
got
get
you.
in. But can you give us a sense, voters who might not be as aware of the damage that these things could do, different sets of scenarios that could wreak havoc for your jurisdictions in 2024, and like spell those out for us, walk us through what those scenarios could be and what you are doing to prepare for them, sort of pretty quickly, because we're gonna move to audience questions.
Yeah, first and foremost, I wouldn't answer that with any specifics. And the reason I wouldn't answer it with any specifics is because we take a lot of time trying to figure out what the bad guys might do, and the last thing I want to do in a public forum is say, hey, you ought to try this. Right, so I can't get into specifics, but there's a lot of the little hooks that we've already seen, and I'll just give one example since we're running short. In New Hampshire, right, there was a deep fake of President Biden calling up Democratic voters, and he said, "Save your vote for November. Don't vote. Save it for November." Well, if you're not the highest, the most well-informed voter, that might seem a little bit confusing. I mean, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is the president calling. And the likeness on the phone was really good. That's one of the types of things, one of the many types of things that we might see to confuse voters, to inject doubt into the process, and to move folks away from the normal practice. And that really, I think, is the hook. Moving people away from the normal practice is the one giant category that we're really most concerned about.
How do you prepare for scenarios that you can't even imagine, that you don't even know could exist?
Yeah, I mean, well, what we have done at Maricopa County is our IT team has actually hired an AI expert. So is on board, is focused on this, not only as it relates to elections, but beyond. That is extremely important. And the thing that I will say to people is that I have looked at this, and I agree with Adrian's approach. I'm not going to talk about specific scenarios, but I would discourage people to get their election information from AI chatbots. There's a lot of people out there that are starting to use AI chatbots, particularly younger people, as like their Google search. I spent a whole day looking at these. They're not very good. Maybe they're going to get better, but where I encourage everyone to go are the local trusted voices. So for us, go to maricopa.gov, okay? Go to beballotready.vote. I mean, go to our websites, wherever you are. Don't rely upon the various places you can go out on the internet, because you don't know where they're scraping their information from. You don't know whatever certain objectives they're trying to pursue. Local trusted officials.
Give us a sense of the worst case scenario that you guys are prepared for when it comes to foreign interference, given the shifting dynamics ahead of 2024 on an international level, before we go to audience questions.
No. Again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. We have such an incredibly fragile system, and knowing the system as well as we know the system, we can imagine worst case scenarios that our adversaries can't even comprehend. And one of the strengths in the American electoral system is its diffusion and diversity. Jeffco doesn't use any of the same stuff that I think any of our counties use, or that the state of Arizona uses, and that's good. And your states and your counties use a lot of different types of systems too. That's a strength. Having a centralized system means there's one point of weakness. having a whole bunch of different ways of doing things and different techniques and different tabulations, that is actually a strength in the American election administration system. So we can look at what's the worst case scenario for us, and we have run through many, many scenarios, but I respectfully will refuse to answer that question.
The one thing I would keep in mind is paper. Paper. You know, even with all of this, and I can tell you that all at election offices across the country, folks are very much focused on those threats from the outside with cybersecurity, but in the end, paper. I think it's nationally over 93% of votes are on paper, much higher percentage elsewhere. Paper, 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 backups, audits. So I don't want to get too, afraid of what might happen from these cyber attacks. We vote on paper, despite what some politicians in Arizona have said.
Questions from the audience? While we wait, perhaps for a question or two, outside of cyber security and physical attacks or the potential for violence, one of the biggest things that people do seem to be talking about is just the threat of local election boards, local county officials not canvassing the election results. We saw this here with Cochise County down south during the 2022 election. They had to be ordered by a judge to canvass those results. And even then, one Republican member refused to show up. I know you're familiar with this trend. There were other ruby red areas within Arizona that sort of flirted with the idea of not canvassing. Not doing so ahead of 2024 could force the state to miss certification deadlines, therefore jeopardizing Arizona's 11 electoral votes. Is this a realistic thing for folks to be concerned about, not just in Arizona, but nationally?
I think it's realistic. We've already seen it happen here. We've already fought against it. And just as a matter of background, the two supervisors who there was a 3-member board, the 2 county supervisors who voted no on the canvass ultimately got ordered. The county got ordered. One of them flipped to a yes, the other one continued no, but both of them were indicted by the Attorney General. And so we're going to make that very clear to all of the individual supervisors across the state. I know Bill would never engage in such shenanigans, so he doesn't even have to pay attention to that, but there's no doubt in my mind that the threat of indictment for interference with an election official is looming. And this is a real thing. If you don't do your job in your office that you've sworn to do, you should be held accountable one way or another. And in Arizona, we have an Attorney General. Her name is Chris Mays. She's already levied 2 indictments, and I think she would be willing to look into the possibility of more if we were to experience that. So we're already looking at all of the options on the table, that being the most extreme.
Our Republican Party has not signed off on our canvass since 2020. This is another one of those things that the story gets published, I'm like, oh, did we do the best job, right? So I think if you had asked me a dozen years ago, what is a canvass? I don't know, right? The end of the election. And I don't fault most voters for not knowing every step of our election process, right? So in Colorado, at the beginning of our election, we do what we call a logic and accuracy test, where we do a lot of things, but we're testing, is our equipment accurately tabulating or tallying those paper ballots, because we have paper for everything, right? Then the election happens. We do a risk limiting audit. And so that's kind of the reverse. We kind of randomly pull a ballot. We double check, was that paper ballot tabulated in the same way on the computer, right? So that we know that those results are correct. And then at the end, we have this canvass process. And what our canvass board is supposed to be checking is, do the numbers ultimately line up, right? So did we count the number of ballots that were cast? And they make sure that we didn't count more ballots than we had voters, right? That's kind of what they're charged with. And every time that our party doesn't sign off, our Republican Party doesn't sign off, they never cite anything that actually has to do with what the canvass board is charged with. But the average voter has no idea what canvass is or what the board is charged with. And so when they see a headline that says, party doesn't sign off on election, right, that looks really scary. And so I think thinking about what are the ways that we can better communicate to the general public, what is this process? And is the thing that just happened actually cause for concern, right? Do I need to worry about my election because the chair in Jefferson County, Colorado didn't sign off, right? The answer is absolutely not, right? That this is just another tool for mis and disinformation, and that's the bigger picture that we need to keep our eyes on so that we are continuing to provide accurate information to voters. I think it's a scare tactic.
I think it's just important to add, agree with that, but it is incumbent upon us as the people doing the canvassing to ask questions if we have questions, for the parties to pursue litigation if they choose. I'm a big proponent of that. I used to be involved in that. But at some point, it has to be over, and I think it is important to the process that everyone who's serving on those canvass boards do eventually, canvass if that is in fact appropriate. And when that doesn't happen, that only sows more distrust in the system.
I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, hi. So two-part. First, how are y'all using social media? Adrian, good to see you, brother. How are y'all using social media influencers to get information to communities of color, right? Because I think too often we're ignoring the fact that regardless how we feel about TikTok and Instagram, they are the two primary ways that young communities are learning. And then second is, it would be helpful to hear from each of you, what is the plan to provide awareness after Election Day? Regardless how we feel in this room, Donald Trump is going to say he won on Election Day, no matter what, right? And I was in Pennsylvania 4 years ago. The election didn't get called till Saturday. Folks forget that. So there's going to be a scenario where there's going to be incredible confusion where no matter what happens, people in all these different localities are going to be wondering what exactly did occur. So it'd be helpful to hear for what can be shared, the strategies on both of those 2 points. And thank you for what you're doing for the country, each of you.
Secretary Fontes.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yeah. Oh, were you gonna wait? Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, we are, the communication strategy that we've got is continuously developing. And the difficulty that we have here in Arizona is that we have and I say this with respect to my colleague here, we have a Republican Party in charge at the legislature who doesn't want to educate voters. And they show us this by their priorities in their budgeting, right? If you want something done, you pay for it and it gets done. Maricopa County does a good job of doing that. So we're, to a great degree, hamstrung from being able to engage in just about any kind of voter education. Now, we do have a community engagement office that really tries to get out there. I personally go across the state directly into communities of color to try to do what I can. But the notion of getting and engaging social media influencers above and beyond sort of the de minimis, whatever we can do with what we've got, just isn't a part of our strategy right now, sadly. I do have one of my communication officers here. We might be able to work on that, and if you have any suggestions, Michael, that would be very useful, and thank you for the question. But that's about where we're at right now from the state's perspective and our capacity.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and this was just raised within the last week at another meeting about getting social media influencers involved, and I'm very open to that. We have stretched ourselves. Before 2020, Maricopa County was known as I think they do important stuff, but we don't really know what they do. It's very much keep our heads down. But we just kept getting kicked in the gut over and over again during the Cyber Ninja audit, our election workers accusing our folks of committing crimes, that we had to find our voices. As it relates to the end of the election, after the election, I think I'm a bit of an expert in that. In 2022, it takes between 10 to 13 days to have final results in Maricopa County. It's not because we're doing anything wrong. In fact, it's because we follow the law. It's because in 2022, 290,000 people dropped off their early mail-in ballot on Election Day, which then elongates the process. So that's number one. Number two is, this is sort of one of the ultimate swing states. Maricopa County is the ultimate swing county. So these races, the networks can't call them 4 days. And by the way, the network calling something isn't a thing. It's not a thing. I know we all think it is. The only thing is the canvas, right? The only thing is the certification. But we have gotten so obsessed with this. Has the network called this or not? So what we did in Maricopa County, and this goes way back to Helen Purcell days when she was our recorder, doing daily press conferences. They've just gotten a little bit bigger over the years, but where we tell the story to people, we go on social media. This is where we're at. This is how many ballots are yet to be counted. This is how close the race is, and we have to continue to do that. Unfortunately, we have so much pressure from certain people in our state saying, you need to, wrap this up, but what is going on? There's something going on. That's why we need to continue to tell people, this is how it's done, and I will take accuracy over speed every day when it comes to elections.
You might be shocked to know that my county commissioners in Jefferson County are not social media experts, nor are they experts in reaching communities of color. It's shocking. I don't understand. So TikTok is not an allowable app on a county device. So that is not a platform that we have, but I think it's something that's interesting to look at if the reality is this is where voters, and particularly voters who need more information, are. When I was at Common Cause, I ran the state's largest nonpartisan election protection hotline, and we did pair with influencers, right? Because an influencer, what that means is it's somebody you trust, right? It's somebody you look to. I buy the shoes from that girl on Instagram because I trust her to look cute, right? She's telling me what's good. And I think that that's the reality of how we need to be communicating with voters. So I was on Instagram lives with people who normally are talking about fashion, right? But there's so much about voting that our communities need to know. When I was doing trainings for the hotline, one of the attorneys was listening, and we were talking about how if you are somebody in Colorado who has a felony conviction, but you finished your term of confinement, you are eligible to vote. And she was like, I didn't know that. And she calls her cousin right away. She's like, get down to a vote center. You're allowed to vote, right? We have to meet people. I hate the phrase, meet people where they are, but we do. We have to meet them where they're actually spending their time in the spaces that they find trusting. So I absolutely think it should be something that we're all exploring. I also created a first of its kind for my county advisory committee. My youngest member is 15. My oldest member is in her 70s. And they are advising us on where should we be, how should we be talking about things. I'm a nerd who works in county government. I don't even use the words that normal people use anymore. And so I need the folks around me to say, this is how we do it better. This is how people can actually hear you.
Well, thank you all so much. Such great perspective and good story ideas. Thank you.
Thank you all for such an important discussion to get us going today. We will be following up on many of the points raised in today's panel with more information on ways to protect our election in November, so stay tuned for that. Go to newdealforum.org for more information and check out our democracy playbook. Before we move on to the next item on your program, I want to mention that one section of the democracy playbook focuses on civic engagement. Including recommendations for engaging with the business community to strengthen the democratic process. For more on that, I'm pleased to welcome up Katie Wonnenberg, Principal at Public-Private Strategies and President of the Business for America's Future Fund, where she works with governments and businesses across the country, from the White House to Fortune 500 companies to Main Street. And before we start, you'll notice that Katie is on your program as part of our breakout sessions today. Unfortunately, her session co-leader, Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, is under the weather and not able to be with us, so you should be getting information as you came in, but just note that instead we will have a breakout session on public safety at that same time today. So with that, Katie, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks everyone, and I know, we just had a great conversation about the important role that many of our elected officials are playing in protecting the democratic process. And one of the things that we were going to talk about in our roundtable today was the important role that business should be playing in that. So just to back up a little bit, in 2020, my business partner and co-founder in public-private strategies, Rhett Buttle, was on the Biden campaign, and really around August started to see this need and desire to engage with the business community about what we were anticipating could happen once we were getting closer and closer to November, which was this delegitimization of the outcome of the election. And so we started to work behind the scenes to engage with business leaders and business owners across the country to really impress upon them, and I think for really the first time for them to make the deep connection that, you know, their business, their stability, their ability to hire, to run their businesses was deeply rooted in this idea of a strong democracy. And so out of 2020, I know it was a very challenging period of time for many of us, for those of us who unfortunately lived in Washington, D.C. to see the events of January 6th, to get to January 20th. And then as we have looked at the next 4 years, and you know, as we stand here in Arizona, you know, I'm so impressed with the caliber and I think the consistency we've seen from those elected officials who have been protecting democracy. So my message to you all, many of you who are elected officials, many of you who are supporting elected officials, is how important it is that you bring that message to the business community in your states and your localities. And I do want to just also maybe make a connection. Mayor Gallego was talking this morning about this incredible investment that is happening in Arizona. You know, you have not only the Taiwan manufacturing plant coming, the chip manufacturer, but she said 23 companies are making investments here in Arizona. That 24 companies, I think the Secretary of State told me last night that something like 40,000 new jobs in Arizona. So the connection I'm making for you is, for those 40,000 new jobs, you need important things like infrastructure, you need stabilization of cost, you need goods, you need innovation. And what does that require? That requires a strong democracy. That we know that business owners over and over say, we need to have stability, we need to have common sense, we need to make sure that everything we are doing is to allow our communities to thrive. In some polling that I'm happy to share with all of you that we just recently did, 80% of business leaders, this was a Gallup Morning Consult poll, said businesses should act to protect democratic institutions. And then on top of that, 86% of small business owners believe democracy and capitalism are linked. And so we know that the business case is there, we know the democracy case is there, and we are working hard to merge those two together. So I just want to thank the New Deal team who had to fly by the seat of their pants and an adjustment on the schedule. I want to thank you all. But I just want to say, I'm not sugarcoating the challenges that we all face as voters, as those who are protecting the voting process. But as many of you in this room who have taken an oath to serve your communities, I really encourage you over the next days, weeks, and months to take this responsibility to the business leaders in your community and impress upon them the very important role that they play in ensuring that not just in 2024, but in future years, these attacks on our democracy, those attacks that delegitimize our democracy, are met with a wall of just strong, forceful messages that say our democracy is intact, it is important for us to move forward, and it is important for our communities to thrive. So thank you very much for creating this space for me today. Again, we have tons of polling. Some of it is actually broken down by key states. So please come find me, and I'm happy to share my card and share that information with you going forward. So thank you.